Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I'm really glad you're joining us today because we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. World War II is, without a doubt, the most documented conflict in human history. I mean, we've got thousands of books, hundreds of films, and literally countless documentaries covering what feels like every single angle. But here's the catch. Despite all this information, so much of what we just accept as common knowledge about this war, it doesn't actually line up with the historical data. So, what if everything you know about World War II is wrong? It's a pretty bold question, right? But it's one we absolutely need to ask. In this explainer, we're going to dismantle some of these shattered illusions and, frankly, incorrect facts that have been handed down to us for decades. We're talking about the myths taught by well-meaning teachers, the dramatic liberties taken by Hollywood blockbusters, and yeah, even the stories passed down by our grandparents. Let's dive in and see what the actual historical data tells us. All right, let's start with myth number 1. The dictator's true origins. You know, almost everyone naturally assumes that Adolf Hitler was German. And hey, it makes total sense on the surface, right? But the reality is completely different. He actually wasn't born in Germany at all. He was born in Braunau in Austria back in 1889. In fact, he was an Austrian citizen who lived as a stateless individual, meaning he officially belonged to no country, for a really huge chunk of his adult life. His actual power to power is honestly pretty bizarre. So after being born in Austria, he famously tried to get into the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts in the early 1900s, and well, he was rejected. Twice. He spent years scraping by as a failed artist, literally living in homeless shelters in Vienna. It actually wasn't until 1932 that he finally gained German citizenship. Think about that. That's just one single year before he became chancellor. He had been entirely stateless for over a decade before that happened. Moving on to myth number 2, the true cost of victory. Now, the raw numerical data really challenges the standard American-centric victory narrative that we often hear. The United States lost approximately 420,000 people in World War II. And let's be clear, that is an absolute tragedy and a massive, heroic sacrifice. But then look at the Soviet Union. They lost between 26 and 27 million people. It's a scale of loss that is just hard to even comprehend. We're talking about a 60 times difference in human lives lost. 80%. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering percentage of all German military casualties that happened while fighting the Soviets on the Eastern Front. The vast majority of the actual military conflict and the ultimate destruction of the opposing army happened in the East. So what's the big takeaway here? It's really a shift in how we view the timeline and impact of the war. Look, the D-Day invasion was heroic, and it was absolutely crucial. The U.S. supplied vital equipment, fought fiercely in the Pacific, and liberated Western Europe. But the historical data shows us that D-Day actually happened after the war's outcome had effectively already been decided at the Battle of Stalingrad. Ultimately, it was the Soviet Union that really broke the back of Nazi Germany. Okay, let's look at myth number 3, the nature of the enemy. Hollywood movies love giving us this really simple, almost comforting picture, right? The idea that all German soldiers were just these evil, ideological fanatics who gleefully chose to commit terrible acts. But post-war psychological studies revealed a far more disturbing historical reality. Most ordinary soldiers were exactly that, ordinary. Many of them were just conscripted teenagers who literally had no choice in the matter. They were regular guys trapped in this massive, overwhelming system of obedience, fear, and state propaganda. Now, to be absolutely clear, pointing this out does not excuse the horrific atrocities that were committed. Not at all. But understanding exactly how ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil is a really vital lesson for us today. It demonstrates that the capacity for regular people to get swept up in dark, terrible systems, well, that can happen anywhere if we aren't constantly vigilant. Which brings us to myth number 4, heroes, villains, and nuance. Winston Churchill is rightly remembered as the brilliant wartime leader who arguably saved Britain in 1940. We all know that story. But we also have to grapple with another number here, 2 to 3 million. That is the estimated number of people who died in 1943 when a truly devastating famine struck Bengal, India, which was under British rule at the time. The historical record clearly shows us that during this catastrophic famine, Churchill actively diverted food supplies away from starving India, directing them toward British war stockpiles instead. And furthermore, when he was informed about the massive civilian deaths that were occurring, historical accounts report that he made some highly callous remarks, even going so far as to ask why Mahatma Gandhi hadn't died yet. So how on earth do we process this? Well, we use what's called the yes-and technique of historical analysis. Yes, he was the savior of Britain with his brilliant leadership in 1940, and he leaves a dark legacy involving the Bengal famine and deeply problematic views on empire and race. To truly understand history, we have to be able to hold these two totally contradictory truths about a single person simultaneously. Both of these things are true.
All right, let's switch gears and do some rapid-fire history myths. First up, we have that endless rumor that Albert Einstein was a terrible student who failed math. It's a fun little story, isn't it? Kind of makes us feel a bit better about our own report cards. But the reality? He had actually mastered calculus by the age of 15. Historians have debunked this completely over and over again, yet for some reason, the myth just refuses to die.
Second rapid-fire myth, the idea that the National Socialist German Workers' Party fits neatly into our modern political boxes. If you look at their early economic policies, you'll see things like massive state control, huge public works programs, and a lot of heavy anti-capitalist rhetoric. History is messy, folks, and it absolutely resists being squeezed into our simple, modern left-right political labels. And our final rapid-fire myth for today, the idea that the atomic bomb alone ended the war in the Pacific. The reality is quite a bit larger than that. Japan's surrender was very likely forced by a combination of the horrific atomic bombings and the decisive Soviet Union declaration of war and invasion of Manchuria on August 8th. You see, the Soviet entry was sandwiched right between the two bombings, and lots of historians argue it was equally decisive in finally forcing the surrender. Finally, let's talk about why messy history matters. This brings us to a core philosophical shift for this explainer. As the quote says, history is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It is messy, contradictory, and deeply human. Honestly, the most dangerous thing we can do as learners is reduce our complex past to these simplified myths. Sure, they might be comforting, they might make for great movies, but they actively stop us from truly learning the real lessons of the past. Which leaves me with one final question for you today. Are you ready to let go of the comforting myths and embrace the messy truth? It's something to really think about. Keep questioning your assumptions, guys. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and be sure to subscribe so we can keep challenging what you thought you knew. See you next time.